Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Hope the sun is shining. Hope the birds are singing. Hope the wind is at your back. I got an incredible show for you guys today. Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments when the world doesn't need another leader in a tailored suit with bullet points and buzzwords. It needs a guide, a mirror, a fire starter. Today's guest initiates warriors. He walks them to the edge of their identity, hands them the flint, and says, "Now light it up." For over 2 decades, Eric Kaufmann has been guiding CEOs, founders, and senior leaders through the crucible, helping them break down the illusions of self importance, shed the skin of performative leadership, and step into something real, something forged in the fire of clarity, presence, and sacred responsibility. He's the author of Leadership Breakdown, The Four Virtues of a Leader, books that don't just sit pretty on a bookshelf, they initiate. Eric's work is where Zen meets the boardroom, where ancient wisdom meets modern chaos, and where the right of leadership is not handed to you, it's earned through trials, through courage, grit, faith, and focus. This is not about optics. This is not about quarterly gains. This is about inner revolution, the kind that echoes outward and recalibrates the system itself. So if you're ready to trade comfort for consciousness, if you're ready to drop the mask and meet the mirror, then hold fast, because today we're not interviewing a guest. We're crossing a threshold. Welcome to the show, Eric Kaufmann. Thank you for being here today.
That is just gorgeous. I love the intentionality, the care, and your own creativity that pops through that presentation. So thank you for that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm excited you're here. You have a lot of life experience and you've helped lots of people. And more than that, like your own path is something that sort of shines a light on what is possible. And so, you and I talked previously a while back just about initiation and kind of thresholds and stuff. And I thought I'd just kind of open this up with a fire starter right here. What is the price of initiation, and how does one know they've truly paid it? Not with money, not with time, but with something that doesn't grow back.
Hmm. Hmm. The price of initiation is comfort, quite frankly. The coin that we have to pay, the fee that we have to give to be initiated is that we have to be courageous enough, as it were, right? And visionary enough to see ourselves on the other side and pay that price of comfort, because that's what initiation does fundamentally, right? That we talk a lot about protection and wanting to be safe and things of that nature. Yes, yes, and yes. But what I found over these many years of doing this, in my own life and with lots of other people, it isn't just safety, it's comfort, and I think we underestimate the power that comfort has in our lives. And to be initiated, certainly it's scary, but it's uncomfortable. We have to leave the familiar, the known, the rehearsed, the easy, which is not just in the environment around us, but it's also in the relationships that we have. And fundamentally, it's about our own sense of who we are and ourselves. And we have, the price we pay, the fee we have to give is the discomfort, right? The
Yeah.
departure from the things that are easy, normal, familiar, and natural, and be willing to be bent and beaten a little and disassembled a little bit, because that's what an initiation does, right? It says that you, as the initiate, have been really consistent and have learned something. You've achieved something. You've arrived somewhere. You've completed something. And now it's time to take all that you've achieved and arrived and completed and make that not the pinnacle of your life, but the foundation for the next phase, for the next stage. And so we come to the initiation with resources and abilities and experience and value, and we have to so we're asked to set that down, set it aside, and walk through the discomfort to discover, to become what's on the other side of the threshold.
It's so well said. In my life, I've found that initiation for me on some level comes from this idea of discomfort, like losing a child or your wife having cancer or losing everything you have or all your possessions at the age of like 45. It's really hard, Eric. Like, you read these books, or maybe you've gone to school or something, but nothing initiates like life, man. It's these things that hit you on an idle Tuesday, where you're in the dark, man. Like, you want to cry, but you try to force yourself to laugh, but these situations, like, I feel on some level, like the world we're living in, it's like we traded initiation for like a handful of cash. Like, we're trying to teach initiation to people. Like, it's like, hey, let me take you this business course, or take this particular transformation course and we'll teach it to you. But it never works. It never works. It seems like to me. What do you think?
Well, I think one, you're making me think of a Pink Floyd song, right? Which is
Wish you were here.
it's totally what you were there, right? What have you traded, right? So there's that whole. I mean,
Yes,
we're not the first ones to contemplate that, and they put it into a gorgeous song. I mean,
they
I love
did.
that song. Um, Look, initiation is a part of the human journey, right? Now, we can choose to participate in that journey, or we can opt out. For the most part, opting out is a capitulation to the forces of conformity and ease and comfort. And so now I'm going all Pink Floyd on us, right? But
I love it.
in fact, uh, if we prioritize, or if we are inculcated, or if we're convinced, or if we are bribed, or if we are guilted into comfort and conformity, hey, I didn't go to school in the US, right? So from when my kids came home from school, like elementary school, and I saw their report cards, right? On the report card, this didn't happen when I was a kid, but on the report cards in my kid's school was a column that rated them on what was called citizenship. I don't know if that's still a thing, or if you saw that in your kids, but citizenship, right? And they would get like an A, B, C, D, E sort of on citizenship. And what is citizenship? It's really a grade that the teacher gives a kid on how compliant they are to the structures and the rules of the classroom. Now, there's a certain part of that that makes total sense. You don't want a bunch of kids flying off the handle in the classroom,
Yeah.
but that it exists as a rateable construct. In other words, in our society, we are valuing conformity, right? And the society needs conformity to sort of stay intact, but that's what we get. And the comfort that comes with conformity is the comfort of I can just get my life by. I don't have to be in too much pain. I can just get by. That's not available to those of us who say we want to live our lives as a spiritual devotion. That's not available to those of us who say we want to live our lives as a creative expression. It's not available to those of us who say we want to live our lives as a conduit for love, for power, for beauty, for meaning, for purpose, for contribution, for giving. That's just not available. If we are going to live our lives as a conduit for these things, as a beacon for other people, as a search for spirituality and meaning, then we must go through initiation. If we want to live our lives for conformity, if we prioritize ease and comfort as a primary thing, physical comfort, social comfort, financial comfort, relational comfort, reputational comfort, if that's our guiding force, we will circumnavigate the initiations. But those are not the people in my life. Those are not the people that I enjoy being with. Those are not the people that I'm drawn to, and that's not me. And so I've been initiated over and over because that's what is the journey of unfolding. That's the journey of becoming. That's the journey of meaning. Um, we can avoid initiations. We can avoid going into the initiation. The initiation will come at us. We can avoid going into it. I don't think that's anybody that's listening to your show.
Thank you. Yeah, I see it in my life, and like, I think people that find themselves on the threshold of initiation, they get, back to Pink Floyd, they get comfortably numb. And you start seeing, like, I talk to a lot of psychologists and stuff, and they bring up like the DSM and all these mental illnesses and these ailments, whether they're eating disorders or these things that are just weighing on society. I can't help but think that comes from a life of living unrealized dreams, of just pushing this stuff down, and it pops out like a balloon. When you squeeze a balloon, like, it pops up over here. I got an eating disorder. Oh, I'm angry. Like, is that a fair assessment?
My wife is a psychologist, and she taught at the PhD level for, I forget what, 10 or 12 years, and her specialty was teaching on DSM. So we had a lot we've had a lot of discussions about the DSM, right? And one of the things about it, so for people who don't know, right, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, it's like it's the textbook on all mental conditions that are defined by the American Psychological Association, right? And so two things. One, when I first met her, I started reading the DSM, and it was like, holy shit, this is me,
Yeah,
this is me, this is me.
all
This
of it.
it's a very disturbing thing to read through these diagnostics of, social anxiety disorder, psychopathy, detachment disorder, whatever. You just name it. I'm like, oh, damn
That's
it. I see
me.
a lot of me in that. um, so I'm not gonna, you know, there are times and conditions where we really are, outside of the realm of typical, right? Where we really
Yes.
need help, and we really need,
Yep.
there are times when being diagnosed as bipolar can be super helpful, right? Because it gives somebody who just thinks that, life is so difficult, there's a path, there's a support system. Um, so that's on the one side, right? On the other
Yeah.
side, I don't know what the hell normal means. You know, I don't know what normal means, and quite frankly, normal for the most part means uh, conforming. That's really what it means, right? When you say so and so
Yeah.
is normal, it just means they're conforming, right? They're in the majority, and so a life of meaning, a life of purpose, a life of contribution, a life of creativity, a spiritual life is disruptive. It's disruptive, right? And there are times when we feel downright crazy.
Yeah.
You lose a child. Nobody in their right mind would expect you to be normal. You are literally crazy, right? The grief rips away the threads of normalcy, right? The sheer shock of being in this unexpected place where not only your family, but your heart and your identity, your sense of meaning and purpose has been rendered and torn. How can you be normal? You have to be a little crazy for that period, right? But if you cling to that as the reason to be crazy for the rest of your life, you miss the initiation, right? But and I'm talking to somebody who's gone through this, right? So there's
Yes.
a period, there's a grieving, there's a pain, there's a loss, there's a tearing down, and then there's a healing, there's a coming back together. You will never be the same person again. Never. You will move on though to include that as part of your personhood, right? And that initiation, that an initiation like that, George, and something like that, just rips the veils. And you're either going to then be blinded by the light that's come on from the veils be opened, or you're going to be awakened by that light and move towards a new direction. And from all our conversations, it seems, that's certainly been true for you.
It's really well put. And it hits home. There's something about the fire of righteousness that burns inside you, though. And what I mean by that is like when you find yourself, and anybody listening to this, think of something you've been through that that changed you, that fundamentally changed the DNA of which you live your life through, your worldview, your lens, your ideas, your relationships. There's a certain sort of righteousness that comes out of there. And for me at times, and I think other people, that righteousness can be dangerous. Like I find myself sometimes like, whoa, I am being like, who am I to be this righteous person? Like, how do you balance that? Like, because you have these incredible feelings like that is wrong. You're commodifying. That's wrong. You get all mad, like for me anyway. And then I have to pull back and be like, wait a minute, who am I to say that? Like maybe they're going through their own thing. But how do you balance the righteousness that comes through the fire of initiation?
That's such a great question. It's been a great question. It's so subtle and it's so profound and it's so real. Um, um, there's an expression in Hebrew. It's not going to translate well. I'll try it anyway. It says essentially, "There's nothing worse than the morality of a reformed whore." And so Forgive me if it's like I'm butchering it, right? But it's sort of down that alley, right? It's
Right.
like,
Yes.
I've reformed, therefore no sex for anyone.
You're right.
It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Right.
whoa, whoa, wait a minute, back
Right.
off, right? Or, you know, you know, the 56-year-old man who's divorced and now he's done his first, mushroom ceremony and he's come out, he's like, the purpose of life is to promote mushrooms. I'm like, whoa, 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 slow down for a second here, right? So there's I think it speaks to that righteousness, but it's that righteousness is essentially the zeal that is the unpacking of a brand new set of possibilities coming into our
Mm,
neural system and nervous system. That righteousness is an inevitable sort of first leg post initiation, right? It's raw, but it's not yet sort of mature or sophisticated, right? And
yes.
so I don't see that righteousness as inherently bad. I see that
Okay.
righteousness as a
Good.
delightful sign that something has been unlocked, right? I am no longer the person I was, and I need to convince myself first and foremost, because the revelation is like spiritually complete. But intellectually, emotionally, I have to catch up with that part of me that's now light years ahead. And that quote unquote righteousness is not just me trying to convince everyone else. It's me trying to convince myself. I need to be that sort of black and white about it so that I can buy into it and eventually internalize at an operational level what's come to me so clearly at the spiritual or at the sort of the transcendent level. Now, if that person sort of doesn't mature, right? So the initiation brings this big giant boost
Yes.
of energy, right? You cross the threshold, you've gone through the travails and the challenges, you've digested it, and now you're like, you're like a bigger human. There's more energy in you, there's more life force in you, there's more possibility in you, there's more vision in you. The last thing you want to do is stuff that, right? But now
Yeah.
you're walking around, you're like, I have seen the truth. I am the truth. And my turban is wrapped nothing but truth. I am like the preacher God, the prophet upon the planet. It's a beautiful thing, right? And it with practice, with spiritual maturity, with guidance, right? With some really good mentoring and teaching and guiding from other elders who've gone through this before, that intensity can mature into confidence, right? And then when I'm confident and then the confidence matures into actual personal power. And what happens when we arrive in our personal power is we feel less of a need to proselytize, less of a need to
Mm,
preach. Oftentimes we're preaching out of either excitement or fear, right?
right.
But when we're in the mature space, we want to enroll, we can honor the person, right? You get a little more nuance, but that zealot, that sort of righteous energy, it's kind of cool, right? It's also it's like it's the movement of energy and power. Um, but I think, and this is one of the things that in our society we struggle with greatly. We don't have structures for elders. The initiation
Right.
was never ever. There's no indigenous, or there's no culture, there's no tradition where the initiates were just doing all this shit on their own, right? It was within a context. There was a
Right.
communal context. There was a social
Right.
context. There was a spiritual context. There was a process. And so you would go through the initiation, you'd almost crash and burn. You made it through. Hallelujah. They'd receive you, they'd celebrate you, they'd hold you, they'd honor your sort of righteousness. You'd make big declarations. And then there was a process for how do you turn this spirit into flesh? How do you turn this idea into neural system? How do you make your nervous system live into the new stage that you exist in? And because we don't have that, we see people having wonderful initiatory experiences going off the deep end. Now they've got, they are the truth, they are the new religion, this is the way to do things. I welcome it, and I want to help people sort of mature it.
I love that. It when you said you step in like this, you step into the zeal and you have this initiation and you've moved through this threshold. It makes me think of Joseph Campbell and like the different masks that we wear. And I think when you do step through the threshold, like you're now looking at this mask. And the question that comes to me is, do you burn it, do you bury it, or do you bow to it?
You got more B options, my friend?
I'm going for alliteration here.
That's very beautiful. Do you bury it, do you burn it, or do you, what was the third one?
Bow to it.
To the mask
The mask
that
that
you
that you recognized you were wearing.
I'm going to put this in the way that sort of I've sort of discovered, and hopefully that
Okay,
answers the question, right?
please.
I go through life. Well, let me see if I can make this personal. Um, um, 2018 to 2022, right? A period of time in my personal life was really intense. It was the most intense initiatory journey that I've been on in 25 years, right? It had sort of torn asunder a lot of my assumptions. My wife and I ended up in deep therapy on the verge of
Wow.
separation. I wanted to recast my business or just walk away from it altogether. I felt utterly without the ability to communicate effectively with my friends and family. It was a very intense 4 year journey, right? Um, Something precipitated it. I welcomed it. For all the decades that I've been doing this work, it took everything in my skill, in my experience, in my resource to navigate this and hold my shit together.
Right.
It was really hard, really hard. Sort of 2022, it ends. It took me about through the year 2023 to digest it, to like actually turn, because again, there's the zealot of 2022, and
Yes.
now it took a year to become like, okay, this is in my nervous system. What changed? I now have new language. I have new possibilities. Some of my old childhood, drama was resolved, and so, you know, so at the end of that period, I am Eric, and I'm not Eric, right? That's the
Yep.
nature of going through the sort of and the integration part of the completion of the initiation. I'm done. I'm the same person, but I'm not the same person. The Eric that lived in 2018 is no longer the Eric running the show in 2022, 2023, 2024, right? So that mask, do I burn it? Do I bury it? Do I bounce it? I don't actually see it as a mask. What I see it as, what we have is there is me up to a point. There's a process that I've gone through. That could be a day, it could be a month, it could be 4 years, it could be 10 years, right? But that initiation is over. There's a new version of me on the other end of it, right? On the other side of it. The guy that's left behind, he's my inner ancestor.
Mm.
I have a series of inner ancestors. I have a series of Erics who've been initiated. And every time this sort of consciousness moved on to the next Eric, there's a previous version that is an inner ancestor. And so I have these inner ancestors, and I can treat these inner ancestors as we treat ancestors in most traditions. I'm grateful. I turn to my ancestors for advice. They inform me. They're excited. There's an ancestor of me that ended around 34, 35. And I'm doing stuff now that he wanted to do. He's literally cheering me on.
That's so beautiful.
He's literally cheering me on because it took like 20 plus years to accomplish what he wanted to do, but he wasn't the guy who could pull it off. He just wasn't. He tried all his, right? That guy tried for all his might to pull it off, couldn't. And it required like 3 more initiations before this version could do what that guy wanted to do. So I don't see it as a mask that needs to be discarded or burned. I don't see it as something that has
Okay.
to be like deified or glorified and bow to it. I see it as a series of inner ancestors. And these ancestors are there as my resources. So they're me and they're not me, right? In this lifetime. I'm not talking about other lifetimes. I'm just talking about from the day I was born to today. And these inner ancestors can be a very rich resource to me. I can go back to them. I can ask them. They can encourage me. Now, if I don't treat the inner ancestors the way they want to be treated, if I don't tend to them, if I don't honor them, they become inner ghosts and they haunt me. So the past, the sort of the pre-initiatory versions of us can be haunting ghosts, right? Unfinished business, unrealized material, undigested, uninternalized aspects of us. And they hang out like ghosts, kind of like,
Yes.
and those ghosts are especially vocal around 3 a.m.
Totally. They show
That's
you
when they
things.
come on. They
Yes.
go, "Ooh, remember me?
Yep.
And mostly what they're mostly pointing at is our lack of integrity. Most of what our ghosts are showing us is where we didn't follow through as we said we would, where we fell short of our own possibility and expectations of ourselves. They're holding us to account,
Yeah.
right? So this is a long answer, but I don't see it necessarily as a mask or persona that needs to be buried or burned, because I find that to be, more violent than what my system works for, you know. But to say that there's a version of me that is me and not me, and lives there as an inner ancestor and can be honored and respected and accessed, that works really well. So I know this is different than your mask. I'm curious how that lands for you, what it makes you think.
I love it. I love the way of looking at it like that. And a while back I was listening to an interview, and forgive me, I can't cite who it was, but it rings in my mind. And the guy said the gentleman was interviewing him, and he asked him about something he did in the past, and his answer was, he paused for a moment and he goes, I don't think I'll betray my former self. And I was like, whoa, that is a great. And then all of that made me start thinking about shame and guilt. And maybe that's just you betraying your former self, like this idea of shame. Maybe it's not, maybe those particular emotions are there to remind you to do the right thing, and it doesn't have to be this heavy weight that hangs around your neck, or, you can stop the ghost at 3 a.m. by doing the next right thing on some level. And then maybe you get a pat on the back instead of a visit from the ghost of Christmas past.
Yeah, no, that resonates for me, right? And that's why I said, most of the ghost's function, most of the ghost's beef is us being out of
Yes.
integrity, right?
Yeah.
That I didn't actually, that I didn't, that version of Eric that's 25 years younger, he's not a ghost. He's literally cheering
Yes.
on. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I have multiple personalities, but that's
I know
how
what
it
you mean.
feels. There's a version of me who's 25 years younger who is goddamn stoked that the collective we have arrived here, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
give him all the credit in the
Yeah.
world for being the visionary he was, and for sending up his successors, the versions of me that would stay the course and keep going at it, right? So I stayed in integrity with that mission, with that intention, with that vision, with that sense of purpose. And I needed to go through a series of initiations to be not ready, because I was ready, to be ripe. The
Mhm.
difference between ready and ripe. Ready means that I'm sort of, intellectually committed. Ripe means that I am like completely available, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, physically. And I wasn't ripe 25 years ago to do what I can do now.
For me, sometimes the question comes up of self-importance. What is self-importance? Why are you doing this? And what does it mean to do this? Why is it important? But particularly the idea of self-importance and integrating that into your life. What do you think of when I say self-importance?
I think you have a remarkable way of putting your finger right on the most significant sore spots of human experience. Um, what else do we struggle with at the end of the day, right? The self. And what is it that the self is struggling with is to be continuously affirmed of our value, and we are quaking in our boots, in our pants, in our underwear. We're quaking in this, this how did one of my Zen teachers would call it the anxious quiver of being, the anxious
Hmm.
quiver of being. It's this perennial undertone that what? I'm not enough. You fill in the enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not loved enough. I'm not capable enough. I'm not desirable enough. I'm not, you know, I'm not enough. I'm inadequate. I'm inadequate. And quite frankly, we learn that as tiny little beings, right? We're tiny, tiny little beings. We're coming to this world. Um, Around the age 18 months, we develop this thing called object permanence. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that term?
When the train goes behind peekaboo, it's the idea,
Peekaboo. That's
right?
exactly it. Because after 18 months, the kid doesn't laugh at peekaboo anymore. Because they figured out, I got you, man. You put your
Yeah.
hands, it's taken away, you're still there. I got you. Okay, not funny. And so, um, but object permanence is yields a few things. One, we start realizing that the thing that's there, even if I don't see it, is still there. So we actually, that's the that's when we form our conceptual thinking, symbolic thinking, It's also when we can begin speaking, right? Because we
Yeah.
can use words to symbolize things that aren't really there. And it's also when we cultivate this other thing at 18 months with object permanence. I am a thing that goes on there. I am a thing. Self awareness comes online. So we don't have classical psychological self awareness until about 18 months with that object permanence, right? So,
Yeah.
kind of psychology 101, as it were. The other thing that emerges when we're self aware is we immediately realize we can't handle life, right? I'm self-aware. I'm hungry. I can't get my own food. I'm self-aware now. I'm aware that I'm uncomfortable. My diaper is full. My diaper is wet. I can't get this diaper off me. I don't have the motor skills, right? So the sense of inadequacy is like it's part of the human design. As soon as we become aware, self-aware, we also become aware that we're inadequate. We can't actually do the things we want to do. We can't get the things we want to get. We can't have the things we want to have. So we are dependent. Um, and and that sets off a chain of events, right? Where we want to be fulfilled, we want to be affirmed, we want to be safe, we want to be loved, we want to be connected, we want to have opportunities, we want to grow, we want to learn all those things. But fundamentally, it's like this self is not adequate. So I must be first and foremost adequate or safe, and then I need to feel special. And so we now have this human ego that has these two big fires, right? The one fire is a fire of safety, and the other fire is a fire of specialness. And a fire of specialness might even outstretch a fire of safety, you know? So this kind of self-importance is this lifelong pursuit and quest for proof and affirmation, a never-ending quest to prove that I am enough, that I can survive, right? And we have our own shades and coloring. I want to be particularly powerful, or I want to be particularly smart, or whatever our DNA gifts are. We want more of that to prove that we're. But then the self-importance becomes, the term that I use. I put this in my book, The Leadership Breakdown. I talk about the number one barrier to executive effectiveness. Right. This is also a number one barrier to life effectiveness. But my audience is executives. I've come to call it ego myopia. Ego myopia, not being able to see and manage our ego. And at the heart of that ego myopia is self-importance, right? I need to constantly be pumped up so I can be important. And in every spiritual tradition of on record, the great quest of spirituality and religion, for that matter, is what we would ultimately call surrender, right? In Buddhism, it's got its own version. Christianity has got its own version. Islam, Muslim, literally the word Muslim, and a person who is Islamic is one who has surrendered. That's what it means to be a Muslim, right? You surrender to Allah. In the Tao, you surrender to the path, to the Tao, and right, every tradition is surrender. And what is that surrender if not, this way to learn to give up self-importance, right? And the thing is, when we're not self-important, it doesn't mean we disappear.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we're not unique or beautiful or creative. The universe has conspired to produce this one being called Eric, George, Shayna, Tara, Bob. What a goddamn orchestration it's taken to produce one human, right? We need to celebrate the bejesus out of that because we are unique. We are unique. It's an honest to God thing. When I came into this universe, never before was this expression brought into the universe. And when I pass, never again will the universe see this exact expression of itself. It's true for you, it's true for any of us, right? So
Yeah.
we are unique, but the pursuit of being special, self-important, that is like at the heart of all our spiritual efforts, right? Can we go from the need to be self-important, and this is what I call sort of householder enlightenment. I believe we can do it in this lifetime. In this lifetime, we can arrive at self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is not the same thing as self-important. Self-important is a sense of lack. Self-acceptance is a sense of actual grace and power. And I call that householder enlightenment because I don't know that I'll ever get to sort of the, Buddha level, Jesus level, sort of like complete surrender. I have glimpses of it, glimpses enough to know that I'm not pulling it off day in and day out. But there's like a lower level, what I call householder enlightenment, self-acceptance, where I can actually arrive in my skin and bone, arrive in my mind and soul, and be at home in it, without needing the world to affirm me on a constant level. And that feels fantastic.
Yeah, that's the zone when you get in. Like I see it sometimes in the creative spaces when I'm doing something where I'm just in it. You know, that people use that term, oh, I'm in it right now. Like that seems to be the moment when you're at home or when you're really fully acting out as who you are sometimes. It's so easy to slip out of it though. It's so nice to catch a glimpse of it, but it's so slippery. And when I think of self-importance, for me, sometimes that moves into self-harm. You know, it's very easy for me to maybe it's a continuum. You know what I mean? Maybe there's self-importance in
Say
the
more, say
middle.
more. This is curious. Say more.
And so like in the moments of contemplating self-importance, I find myself questioning, is this self-harm? And then or is this self-discovery? But sometimes in that moment, like maybe it's contemplation or maybe it's paralyzation. You know what I mean by that? Like sometimes you can drive yourself crazy thinking about what is self-important. Is this self-harm? Or maybe that's where grace comes in. Maybe that's where grace comes in to be like, okay, maybe I just need to sit with this for a little while. But how do you
Well,
deal with that?
know.
Yeah.
I want to know more about the self-harm piece. I'm not. It makes sense to you. You're saying it in a way that makes sense. I'm not. I'm not grasping it in the way that I think you are. So, take me a little bit deeper on that
Okay.
self-harm, self-importance piece.
Okay. So sometimes I'll give you an example. Like recently, I've been writing quite a bit about some particular things happening in the psychedelic world. And I look at it and it's this form of righteousness. Like I'll see some schools that are out there and I see them in my mind. I'm like, what these people are doing is commodifying vulnerability. They're making tons of money from it. I personally don't agree with it. I think it's bad. I think I should say something about it. And so I've written all these different pieces, but at the same time, I come to is this self-harmful? Like, why am I doing this? Like, is there real implications for these people if I say this thing? Like maybe there is. Is that something that I want to be responsible for? Like that might be self-harm. You know, maybe I'm doing, maybe that's harmful. Or is that
Harmful?
self-important?
Is it harmful to who? Is it harmful to you or harmful to the audience? I'm still trying to. I'm not. So you're saying self-harm. You're seeing something. You're naming it. You're calling it out, right?
Right.
And and so you're saying that's righteous. Okay, maybe it is. Maybe it's prescient, or maybe it's necessary, or maybe it's prophetic, or maybe it's just the truth, right? But I'm not seeing the harm. The harm is like you're harming yourself because the blowback that's going to come at you, or because you're harming other people. Where's the harm piece?
I think the harm is in showing people what you're doing is wrong. Like that's wrong. Like that seems very judgmental to me. And I think that judgment is harmful. Like is that
Harmful to others, harmful to
yes,
you.
harmful to others. Like I feel like if I say that to them, maybe there's real implications for them that they're not ready for. And I don't
Mm.
know if I'm the arbiter of like I struggle between is that judgmental? Is that harmful? If I say something about these people and there's real legal implications for them, maybe people come and shut them down. Maybe people come in and take this guy's stuff away. Like how do you deal with that? Like because you said something, there's going to be real world implications for somebody else. Like is that self-importance? Like am I really that important? Is that really going to happen? But I struggle with that.
I love that you're struggling with that. I got to tell you. I mean, I love it. I have such respect for the fact that you're grappling with that, because what you're describing in some ways, at least to my ears, is you're offering a form of leadership, right? You're saying, I see a vision for something possible, and I'm going to lay it out and invite people to take this up as a real, sort of as a calling towards which we can move together, or they can move on their own, right? So there's a leadership element in what you're doing. You're saying there's a better way, and let me tell you what that way is, and let me lead the way, right? Now, with leadership, there's responsibility. And I think I am profoundly, I can't tell you the depth of the profundity of my concern is for leaders who don't have doubt, right? Leaders for
Right.
whom certainty is so goddamn black and white and so simple that they go around
Right.
and they just, espouse sort of as though they are gods without doubt. That to me is terrifying. So to hear you
Yes.
be a leader who's really challenging people to move in a direction that you see as valuable, meaningful, necessary, helpful, and that you doubt yourself in the process is incredibly affirming and very, very sort of, you know, satisfying, right? Because you are grappling with your responsibility. There are implications to being in leadership. I mean, this is a reality. I'm a guide and a coach to executives. These folks live in a world where what they say has real implications to jobs, to families,
Yes.
products, to environments, to communities, to markets. And lack of doubt to me is not a sign of enlightenment. It's a sign of delusion, absolute delusion. To believe somehow that what I know to be true is so true that it's unassailable terrifies the shit out of me, right? I want
Yes.
people in responsible positions to question themselves, to question their motives, to question their methods, to be constantly attuned to their capacity to serve from a place of of um, of contribution, and not just from a place of affirmation, right? So kudos to you for doubting yourself, you know, and rather than letting that doubt just be something that gnaws at you, let that doubt be sort of an element that sits with you and go, let's evaluate our conduct here.
Yeah.
Let's honestly evaluate our conduct here. Where is this coming from? Where is it going? How am I
Right.
contributing here? But I wouldn't let the doubt shut it down, and I wouldn't let it eat you. I would say, hey, doubt, welcome to the party. Have a seat. There's an extra chair right here. Let's chat. What you
Right.
got? What do you
Right.
need? What are you guiding me to? What should I know more of? What should I do less of? Right? Um, so, and the only other thing I would add to that is, and this is a tricky one, but ultimately people are responsible for their choices, right? If they said, I listened to this guy on True Life podcast, he was amazing. I read this piece that he wrote, it blew my mind, and I decided to do something about it. It's a shared responsibility, right?
Yeah.
Somebody made a decision, made a choice. You influence them. We're not going to take that away. That's your point. You want to influence. That's leadership. But you can't take all the responsibility. That becomes a little, because that's maniacal on the other side,
Right.
right? If you sit around and go, oh, whatever I say has implication, people are going to just get blown out because they listen to me. That's very diminishing to other people's agency.
Yeah. It brings up another, what does it mean, influence? What happens when you start leading the way and people start listening and start doing and start accomplishing? Like I've seen that in my life where I got into a point and all of a sudden I've talked to some people and they've done some things and they're like, dude, George, that's amazing. Thank you. Like for me, it's sort of new to see people succeeding by reaching over and talking to them, by volunteering my time to hang out with them. And all of a sudden I see them. It brings me profound joy, like profound joy. I'm so excited. Like it makes me want to cry sometimes. Like I just spent like all this time, like what they did it. Yeah. Like I get to celebrate that. But
Yeah.
there's real responsibility that comes with that too. What do you tell new leaders or in your executive courses when they start turning that corner and they start seeing some successes? What are some blind spots that they may not see?
Oh, there's, there's a lot of blind spots.
Right?
You know, I'll talk about my own experience for a moment because, I was a manager and a leader in corporate before I started my own firm, right? So not only am I responsible for the firm, right? There are other people who work here, but I get paid as an advisor, as a coach, as a consultant, right? As a guide to help people make really intense decisions about their lives. I was on a coaching call just this morning with the CEO, and we realized the person that she'd hired who's been there for 3.5 months is just not going to work out. It's just not going to work out. And this person that she hired is a new mom with a 6-month-old baby who's got financial responsibilities. And so, where do you go, right? Do you keep this person
Yeah.
on because you feel a sense of obligation to their family? Do you let them go because they're not a good fit? Do you find a new role for them where they can thrive? Do you provide them coaching so they can get better? There's not an easy answer here, right? But you know, that literally is the role of a leader, is to affect people. That is, what else does a leader do?
That's right.
Really. And so there's different forms of leadership, right? You can be the boss in a team and an organization. You can be a guy with a podcast who's producing ideas. You can be a coach to people. You can be a parent, right? You
Yeah.
can be a spouse. You can be a priest, a rabbi, right? I mean, but if you're going to lead, you are going to bear responsibility, right? And the higher you are in the structure and the construct, right? If you're the supervisor of marketing, that's one thing. If you're the chief marketing officer, it's another thing. If you're the CEO, it's another, right? But with every leader, the proverbial buck stops here,
Yeah.
right? And so, um, you know, the leaders who are uncomfortable or unwilling to bear that responsibility um, are going to be harmful to their environment,
Yeah.
right? They're going to end up being potentially, I mean, I don't know everyone, but some of the proclivities are micromanaging, right? Because you get all freaked out about stuff
Yep.
going on. You want to be able to make sure that what I'm responsible for, I have a hand in, literally. And so they
Yeah.
touch everything and they become micromanaging. So that's a potential blind spot. The other side that I see of it is that there's a tremendous amount of blaming for
Mm.
leaders who are not willing to take responsibility. It was the weather, it was a regulation, it was a change in market, it was a change in thing, it was my boss wasn't clear, the team wasn't right, we didn't have enough funding. There's always some excuse or something to blame for that
Right.
piece, right? There's another piece where they don't take, not comfortable with the responsibility, where they just avoid. I just don't want to deal with it. I don't want to have this difficult conversation. I don't want to start this difficult project. We're not going to change the strategy and challenge ourselves to be innovative. We just want to avoid, right? And then there's this sort of beautiful version of not taking responsibility, which is anger, just pissed off, just pissed off, barking, yelling,
Yeah.
threatening, frightening, So, micromanaging, avoiding, blaming, anger, those sort of the masks of the fear that's underneath the lack of responsibility. Yeah, and I think that um, a manager, a leader, to take on responsibility has to really check their motives, really check in with your motives. This is to me the distinction between an egomyopia kind of driven leader and what I would call a conscious leader, right? If you're caught in
Yeah.
egomyopia, sort of my need to be special, my own blindness to my own sort of needs, then and the egomyopia has three distinct sort of what do they call them, like primary colors, right? Primary
Yeah.
features. The first one is the need to be right. Then it's the need to be liked and the need to have might, right? Those are the three basic colors of egomyopia. The need to be right. Look how smart I am. Look how clever I am. Look how capable I am, right? The need to be liked. I want to be part of the group. I want to have good relations. I want to be included. And the need to have might. I want to have control. I want to have authority. And if we don't manage those needs, we become what I call an egomyopic manager, right? Leader. And now, rather than sort of graciously shepherding people towards some great outcome, we want the people around us to keep feeding those needs. So the person who has the need to be right is now sitting in the meeting, taking up 80% of the airtime because they need everyone else around them to know just how clever they are. The person who has the need to be liked is so focused on being liked that they're not making difficult decisions. They're not pushing the team because they don't want to alienate everyone and be thought of poorly. Right? The person who has a need to be liked is so focused on not failing that they're micromanaging the bejesus out of everything, and people can't get ahead and can't really grow in their careers. So that's what we need to look out for. We need to look out for that egomyopia and bear the responsibility with what I would call sort of the conscious leadership lens, which I can get to in a minute because it's already a lot of information. But um, the lookout is to look out for our own tendencies to be important, right? To be in our ego state.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. We talked about my three B's earlier, but you got the right, liked, and might right there, man. It seems like you're on the same page, man. I love it.
I can
What?
respect alliteration, my friend. When I heard the B's, I'm like, my man, yes.
Let's talk more about this consciousness lens. Like, this seems like a great segue.
So, kind of the preface to it, right, is we have to pause and take a look at the historical context we're in,
Okay.
right? The historical context is that um, the Industrial Revolution happens in the mid 1700s, 1750s or so. It was a sea change in human experience, right? because up until that point, everything was local, everything was artisanal, everything was, regional at best. You had the kings and they had the kingdom, but the kingdoms were made of a bunch of fiefdoms that
Right.
were kind of self-ruling, and then they would pay taxes to the king, right? If you wanted shoes, your local cobbler would make shoes. If you wanted food, the local baker would bake your bread, or you would bake your own bread, right? Um, the Industrial Revolution creates scale. That was literally the revolution, is that suddenly we had means of production where one factory could turn out 200 pairs of shoes in a month, as opposed to having one person take a lifetime to make 200 shoes or whatever, right? So with the Industrial Revolution, the means of production became sort of the path to power and wealth. It wasn't just because you were born a king or because you were in the priestly, the priests collected money because the church was that powerful. The kings collected money because they could. The rest of the people just did whatever they could in between. The Industrial Revolution introduced a third sector to society, which was the powerful merchant, right?
Right.
Fast forward to 2025, that Industrial Revolution powerful merchant has the order is really eclipsed, right? Who's now
Yeah.
running the world? Merchants,
Yep.
right? The
Yeah.
industrial, the commercial class is running the world.
Yep.
Um, Governments are there for the people, but visibly deeply affected by commercial leaders, right? You
Of
notice, I don't
course.
know if you've noticed, like billionaires sort of twisting the government
Of
to meet
course.
their own needs, right? And the church has sort of come to a far third. I'm using church broadly as in the
Right.
religious institutions, right? So here we are, man. The world is being shaped and architected by commercial drivers, not government, which was social drivers, and not churches or religious institutions, which were spiritual drivers. It's a commercially driven architecture that governs our lives, the shape of the planet, the actual ecology,
Yeah.
what society deems acceptable and unacceptable, the way we communicate, what we ingest for information, what we think of as priorities, fashion, tastes, foods. You know what I mean?
I
It's
do.
it's driven by commercial architects who are ultimately using it to enrich themselves and their ecosystem of investors. Am I sounding delusional? Or is that sort of track?
Without a doubt, I think there's a great piece that says if you want to know who rules the world throughout history, look at the tallest buildings. It was the castle, it was the church, and now it's the Sear, one of these towers of like J.P. Morgan or something
The
like that, or
banks.
commercial interest. Right, the banks,
That's
man,
right.
the
That's right.
banks.
That's really well said. I haven't heard that. I love that. That's should have said that in the beginning just to save me this whole last 5 minutes of rambling on, man. That was
No, it's
amazing.
brilliant.
I will be
Yeah,
using that in the future.
please.
So that having been said, given this moment in history, right, the context of history, um, how the hell are we going to get through this? How are we going to ensure that these architects of society, of humanity, of the planet, that they're not just sort of shapers and users, but that they're stewards? Because that's what happens, right? We talked about responsibility all along. There's a whole host of new set of responsibilities that are now squarely on the shoulders of commercial leaders. Whether they want it or not, it's
Right.
irrelevant. When you're in power, when you're in charge, you have responsibility, right? And so, my theory of change, as it were, is that we need to get en masse these folks who are the commercial leaders to become conscious leaders, to be conscious leaders, right? And in this particular case, to me, the conscious leader is somebody who is not being guided by their ego myopia and their sort of basic human need to be special. So, what does that look like? Fundamentally, it looks like instead of the need to be right, the need to be liked, the need to have might, that those can mature, and we can do that. We can train that. We can teach that. We can coach that. It's been done for millennia. This is not an unusual part of human experience, but that we can cultivate in these leaders who are the architects and shapers three qualities that I refer to as wisdom, love, and power. And that is my mission and that is my work. But as a human in my own life, doing this, in my own life and with others, right? Working to cultivate wisdom, love, and power as the three foundations of this way of being a conscious leader.
I love it. I mean, I think those are three brilliant points to explore. Sometimes in my darker moments, I think a phoenix has to rise from the ashes. Like when I look at higher education, my sister's got a PhD, and I know so many people that have spent so much time in school. But it seems to me someone who spends 30 years or 25 years in school, they've learned to be indoctrinated. And you can't take people that have been indoctrinated and tell them to teach a new system. Like,
Mhm.
so on some level, it seems to me that a lot of what we're teaching is just the old ways. And if I put that into the business sense, I see them come out hungry, thirsty, and wanting to have this external validation, but all they knew how to do is build the old system. So I don't think that leadership's going to come from higher education. I'm not trying to slander anybody that's done that. My heart goes out. There's some brilliant people out there that are working really hard, but I don't see higher education as being an outlet for a new system of wisdom, love, and power. Is that too harsh on higher education?
Uh, I can't find an argument with that. I mean, I agree. I think that, systems tend to want to perpetuate the system,
Yes,
right? And so the legacy the legacy system wants to maintain its own
of course.
stability and validity
Self-importance.
and self-importance and existence, right? Absolutely. So no, I wouldn't turn to the universities to be the bastions of teaching this, right?
Right.
I think what the universities are particularly adept at is training the mind.
Mm,
What we're talking here is about wisdom, love, and power. We want to train the spirit,
I love it.
right? And so, I wouldn't say that our religious institutions are set up for this either at this point. And so, given that the world is drifted and shifted away from the familiarity, my parents don't necessarily recognize the world they grew up in. My grandparents who are
Right.
passed away wouldn't even know what the hell's going on here, right? So, in times of transition and crisis, new structures have to emerge. And so, I think we have to have kind of a non-theistic spiritual construct that
Yeah.
brings in that tends to the spirit without requiring devotion to a particular deity, and that's where we can cultivate more consciousness. Literally, we call it
Yeah.
consciousness. And what's emerging now, and so there's a lot of work around, what's it that like neuroscience, right? It's sort of
Right.
semi-spirit still, but it's still very much within the context of science, right? So there's all this neuroscience, but it's not enough to just explain all the synapses and neural pathways and so forth
It
to
never
explain
will be.
everything in life. It's not
Right.
sufficient. So how do we cultivate kind of, and this is something that I'm thinking about a lot, right? How do we cultivate a non-theistic consciousness development, spirit tending sort of institution that is fundamentally not there to just affirm its own institutionalization, right? How do we build something? This has been my vision for a long time. Like even my
I love
work
it.
as a coach, right? As a coach, as a guide, as a consultant, as a teacher, I'm interested in building, helping people walk down a path, right? This path, though, this initiatory path, right? It goes
Yes.
through initiation after initiation after initiation. We never arrive at a cul-de-sac, right? There's no dead end where this path ends and now we all sit down and say we've arrived, right? This person, I, you, we, as we walk this path over time, the path becomes lighter and lighter until the path eventually just evaporates because I have become the path.
Mm,
I don't need to walk the path. I am now the path, right? And crafting systems that can do that is possible. It just takes a higher level of consciousness and less self-importance, which is often correlated to higher level of consciousness, right? In fact, the rising levels of consciousness is a diminishing of a sense of our centrality and our self-importance. And so we can teach wisdom, love, and power. We can teach people to be more conscious. It's not new. It's been done for millennia. But to your point, I don't think we can teach it from within the exact systems that are committed to their own goals. But the cultivation of wisdom is the ability to see beyond below the surface and beyond the obvious, right? Wisdom, you are steeped in wisdom orientation. Look at your penetrating questions, your poetic language, your capacity to like deconstruct things from multiple perspectives. I mean, wisdom is just oozing out of you as a guiding force. Well, what about love? You're clearly a man whose love is online. You are heart driven. You care deeply. You care so deeply to the point that you're willing to put yourself in peril and danger and uncertainty in order to serve those people whom you love and people whom you don't even know, because your love extends far beyond this name. Your love is a wave that moves through you into the world. And what about power? You're clearly a man of power. You are authentic, you are creative, you allow your own sense of purpose and integrity to shine forth, and you bring that in a way that leverages movement in the world. So here's a man I'm talking to right now who's got wisdom, love, and power. Does that mean you don't have a self-importance need or your own ego need? It's not an either-or proposition. But you have come to train yourself, or you have learned through life, or you have been guided, and here you are as a man with wisdom, love, and power, a conscious leader, deliberating and doubting your impact because you care, not because you're confused. We want more of that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. On some level, and curious to get your thoughts. It seems to me what we're going through as a world is what we go through as an individual in crisis. Like, if all these things that we just talked about needing conscious leadership, about needing new ways, about needing new things, it almost seems like the world is going through the same initiation that we are as individuals. Or is that just through the lens of someone who's at maybe a middle-age crisis, or someone who's going through that initiation? What are your thoughts on that? Has it always been that way? Maybe it's always been that way.
I think that's the nature of nature, right? There's
Right.
there's initiatory
You start to
cycles.
see it.
And you see it as you get through some of them and you begin to see that there is an initiatory cycle, you know.
Right. Yeah.
So when we're young, we're going through it for the first time, and it's just either terribly pleasant or terribly painful, or a little of both, or confusing, or just uncertain. But once you go through it a few times, you cross a threshold once, you cross a threshold twice, you begin to see crossing the threshold is normal. And then you start looking around and going, it's the nature of nature.
Yeah.
It's the nature of aging. It's the nature of evolution. It's the nature of, transmutation. So yes, writ large, we go through it as a society. And I think when you're saying the world, you mean people in the world, right? Because I don't think you mean like butterflies or koala bears, right? You're so yeah. I mean, societies are sort of these sort of meta humans, right? And that's why we have different cultures. You travel the world; it's a beautiful thing to behold, right? We go to Japan, and there's not, Japan is probably a little more monolithic than some other countries, right? But there is a very distinct culture, the Japanese culture. Then we go to Europe, and you can go to, I'm going to be in Italy today, and then I'm getting my little car, and I'm going to drive from Italy to France. I'm going to go, wow, the Italians and French are really different, right? There's a cultural difference. Then I'm going to drive to Germany. I'm going to go, whoo, what happened here, right? This is really different again. And then I'm going to, cross the border into Poland, and you know what I mean? Like, what about the U.S.? We're like one United States, but we are an incredible regional collection, right? My family that lives in Atlanta has some very different cultural vibes, and my family lives in San Francisco, and my friends in Dallas are very different than my friends in Austin, and they're just not that far from one another. So societies have characters, have that's what we call culture, right? And so an individual has an ego, that's our sort of identity, and a group of people has a culture, that's the collective ego, right? And so we go through this journey individually, and we go through this collectively. And I think the gift of going through this over and over and being an initiate, right, who continues to be initiated, is the gift of seeing it more broadly and less selfishly. And to the point of the conversation earlier, the great gift that we can give ourselves is this gift of evolutionary sort of consciousness, of growing, because we take it less personally. And when I take it less personally, I can see it less personally in others and appreciate the process for what it is. Then I can lean in and serve if I want to serve. I can lean back and avoid if I want to avoid, but I can do it intentionally, consciously. Not so much from a place of judgment, but from a place of wisdom. I see what needs to be done. From a place of love, I care enough to involve myself. And from a place of power, I'm going to make certain things move, and I'm going to hold some real boundaries, which is what power allows me to do.
Yeah, it's really well said. I want to be I have some audience members that got questions flying in here, and I'm stealing all the time. So to my audience, I love you guys. Thank you so much. And let me just shift a couple questions here and get some more people in the conversation here. This one comes from Desiree. She says, "You speak about wisdom as a path. How do you distinguish wisdom from intelligence, and how do leaders learn to trust one over the other?"
Um, that's a great, wonderful sort of segue in here. So intelligence, in effect, is the ability to see patterns and recombine patterns. Really, at the end of the day, that's what intelligence is. That's why intelligence tests are mostly pattern tests,
It's so true.
right? If
Yep.
you've taken
Yeah.
an IQ test, it's a bunch of puzzles and
Yep.
puzzles and numbers and letters, but it's all about patterns. So really, to be intelligent is to be able to see patterns and then rearrange them. That's what intelligent people do, right? Whether those are math problems, whether
Right.
that's oh, that
A
was a really
metaphor.
clever way to solve the problem, right? What does it mean to solve the
Right.
problem? It means I saw the problem is, we're trying to reduce our shipping route in the eastern region by 10%. Let me take my thinking cap and put it on. Oh, I see it. The shipping route is going through this. If we went this way and peeled back the hours where there's less traffic, I see the patterns. I'm going to rearrange the pattern there, 10% off. Congratulations, I've accomplished it, right? That's intelligence. Um, Wisdom has some of that, right? Wisdom
Yeah.
has some of that to do with patterns. Um, Wisdom tends to be less in my sort of interpretation of this, right? Wisdom to
Okay.
be it tends to be less self-centered, right? So the wisdom that I can bring as a leader is because I'm sort of diminishing my need to be right, right? Intelligent people can be really pushy on their need to be right, right? I'm smart, and what our ego structure does is our ego uses our natural gifts to accelerate its own ability to get what it needs to get, which is the sense of being special. So if I'm intelligent, what I'm going to push really hard on is my intelligence, and I need to be the smartest guy in the room, right? So wisdom has sort of a bigger pattern, a bigger context, right? Wisdom sees below the surface, beyond the obvious, right? I'm connecting an even bigger field, and I'm depersonalizing. The nature of wisdom isn't just my own learned wisdom. Like people use the word wisdom in different ways. I can say, oh, uh, um, uh, I went through a terrible divorce. And so I know that women can't be trusted in the way that they are. So my wisdom says I'm going to have my own bank account over here in my second marriage because women can't be
Yeah.
trusted. We call that life wisdom. It's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the wisdom that is much bigger than that. The wisdom that comes from like not just seeing patterns, but getting super still. Like one of the features of cultivating wisdom is mindfulness, right? Another feature that cultivates wisdom is curiosity. Another feature that cultivates wisdom is self-awareness. So if you notice what's happening with self-awareness, mindfulness, curiosity, these are yin elements. They're very receptive. They're open. They're spacious. It's not about focusing my intelligence and solving a problem. It's about really allowing myself to step back and see the bigger, bigger, bigger picture to where my own sort of need diminish and diminish. And what arises is a collective service, right? Is something that's good for the collective. So that's how I make a distinction in this case, and particularly as it pertains to leadership.
Yeah. It's really well said. This one comes to us from Neil. He says, "You've lived in both the corporate world and the contemplative. Do you believe great leadership is ultimately a spiritual practice?"
Hmm. Uh, I'm grappling a little bit with great leadership because these sort of labels of
Right.
what's great, I do grapple with that a little bit, and I'm sort of philosophically against platitudes. Like great leaders are contemplative, so I can't go on record with just sort of agreeing
Right.
wholeheartedly. I will go with Neil's sort of invitation and direction here because um, I do believe that leaders that are not contemplative are destructive. Uh, there's some pretty good evidence going on right now, right? And I think that I see that, to lead, even to your question earlier about your own sense of questioning about the harm,
Right.
that's a contemplative exploration, right? Am I doing something that's righteous and helpful or righteous and destructive? Am I doing
Right.
something that's ultimately in service to others, or do I just need to get my own, horn pumping so that I can get a lot of attention? The contemplation is, I mean, wisdom and contemplation are, in the same family. These are brother and sister. They're not even cousins, right? And so I do believe that to achieve greatness in leadership
Mm, well said.
is requires a contemplative practice, 100%. And every one of my clients that I work with, you know, we have this year-long program called the Leadership Evolution Program. It's a phenomenally well crafted and well delivered year-long journey for intact executive teams. So like a whole team, right? 6, 8, 10 people go through it for a year together. And each person gets a coach, and there's team dynamics, there's business planning, there's assessments. There's also a woven in year of instruction in contemplative mindfulness. So to Neil's point, I guess I've kind of tipped my hand. Do I believe that's important? Yes. I think that non-contemplative leaders are destructive. And I think that contemplative leaders are more generative, right? And I also believe that contemplation, to the point that you had sort of alluded to, I think earlier, George, was, you know, it can sometimes be depressive and frustrating, because to contemplate means I don't exactly know what the answer is. I'm going to mull it around. I'm going to think from different angles. But yes, phenomenal leaders are willing to look from different angles and different perspectives. That's what makes them phenomenal leaders. Otherwise, they're zealots. They're cult leaders. They're singular
Mm.
in their perspective. So to both avoid platitudes and answer the question, I do believe that great leaders are contemplative. It's not the only thing they are. There are other features, but um, I do this. You can see there's my meditation cushion, right? So I get up in the morning and I come and meditate in here when it's cold. I have a meditation temple in my backyard where I go when it's a little warmer. Yes, I want some comfort too. Um, and then I get up from my chair here at the desk and go down and sit there on my cushion, between conversations when I can, so that I can like drop back in, digest what happened, get my center back, and return to the next conversation from that place of center and presence. And that contemplative process is part of that.
Yeah, it's great. I appreciate it. This one comes to us from Nuwan. He says, "Can a leader be powerful without being dangerous?"
Yeah, absolutely. What's the other question? I don't
He
know.
goes, yeah,
I can expand.
yeah,
I believe in wisdom, love, and power as sort of the
right.
triad of being a conscious leader, right? Power is we are so freaking twisted around the axle on power in most cultures, not just in this culture. In the US, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Asia, the human condition around power is not a very evolved one. It's not a very sophisticated one, right? And most of the encounters we have with power are diminishing ours. It's someone else is more powerful and I'm less powerful. Every organization, I'm going to say this, and I eschew generalizations. This time it's a generalization. Every organization I know is trying to figure out how to empower their people. Why? Because collectively we have been disempowered. You can only empower people that are disempowered. Somebody asked me a few years ago if my girls are, did I
Mm,
empower my daughters? I have two daughters. Did I empower my daughters? And I said, no. And he looked at me like, wait, you talk about power and empowerment. You didn't empower your daughters? I said, no, you're missing the point. I worked really hard. My wife and I spent a lot of cycles of effort not stripping power from our daughters in the first place. I don't need to empower those who are already in their power.
yeah.
My daughters are in their power. They're these beautiful young ladies in their power, and they're not dangerous. They're in their power. And what does it mean to be in their power? It means that they have integrity, they have authenticity, they are present. That's what to me it means to be powerful. Can you be powerful and not be harmful to other people? Absolutely.
Mm,
If you see where your power is coming from, and if you recognize that everyone has got power. If you take power as a as a zero sum game, then you're dangerous because I can only be powerful to the degree that I strip it away from you.
Yeah.
If I see it as an infinite game, which I believe power is an infinite game, I can be as powerful as I need to be. You can be as powerful as you need to be, and we don't have to curtail one another's power.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's brilliant, especially on the topic of power. There's so many books about there. Like, the great one is Robert Greene's book, The 48 Laws of Power. Like, that was a pretty interesting book to go and read. Whether it's from Confucius, or just, it gives you a great aspect of the way in which power has been used throughout the world. Maybe it's in studying the way in which people use power. Like, I think there's 5 kinds. There's a coercive power, legitimate power, but there's all these different types of power. And once you begin understanding, they're all like a different sort of flavor of power. You can kind of taste the whole palette. But it's interesting to think about the ways in which power has been used against us, the way we use power, the way, like, the different forms of it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, tons of thoughts on that. I mean, again, going back to childhood, right? We are
Yeah.
immediately in a disempowered position for the most part, right? Uh, my mom had, I'm one of 4 kids, right? My mom didn't want to, she didn't set out to disempower me or my brothers, right? She just wanted to stay sane, which, didn't work out all that well for her. It was challenging to be with all of us. But so she, like most moms, like most dads, like most parents, would just say, no, go to your room, do as I say, follow the rules, right? We're back to conformity. So the urge for conformity
Yeah.
has largely to do with just survival and not going crazy, right? But when we insist on people conforming, we are saying that I have a certain structure, that I have the power to make you abide by my structure. And so we're disempowered, right? And so, you know, you walk, and we're disempowered by parents for the most part. Then you go to school, and the teachers give you a grade on citizenship, right? They will grade how much you've been
Right. Right.
conformed and how little power of your own did you bring forth. And then you go to college, and you continue, and you go to work, and it gets really interesting. Then you get in trouble with the law. Now the cops have all the power, or the lawyers have the
Yeah.
power, the judges have the power, and then the government has all these power to affect regulations and rules that will affect you in every way from Sunday. So in every way we turn, there are structures that are containing us. And so our relationship with power is one of 2 flavors, right? I hate it and I want it.
Yes. Yes.
That's not the power that I'm talking about. That's power over people. That's the power
Yep.
of that's the power to compel people. I'm talking about coming into our innate power. So I think of power as living with purpose
Yeah.
and relaxed presence.
Love it.
Living with purpose and relaxed presence. So when I'm in my power, Bruce Lee, I'm going to do this real quick, right?
Yeah. I
There's a
love it.
great movie called Enter the Dragon. If you know Pink Floyd, you probably watched Enter the Dragon,
Of
right?
course.
There's this great scene in Enter the Dragon where they're on the boat going off to the island where they're going to have this great battle to determine who's the greatest martial artist. Remember, Bruce Lee is standing at the helm of this Chinese junk, this boat, and I forget the guy's name. He's wearing a brown suit. He's one of the American, martial artists.
Was that Kareem? Was that
No, it
was
wasn't
that
Korean.
part
It was
Chuck Norris?
it wasn't Chuck Norris, but it was I forget the guy's name, but he walks up to Bruce Lee and he throws a punch like within an inch of his face, and Bruce Lee like doesn't move, and he's Bruce Lee's like looking out into the distance, right, and he throws another punch an inch from his face, and he goes, "What's your style?" And Bruce Lee just kind of ignores him, and he goes, "What's your style?" And Bruce Lee goes, "I have no style," or something to that effect, right? And he goes, "Show it to me." He goes, "Okay, fine, but not here. Over there on that island." The guy goes, "Okay." He says, "Let's take the boat over there." He goes, "Okay." So he goes, "You first." And the guy climbs over the boat, goes down to the dinghy, and then Bruce Lee proceeds to, untie the string and let this guy sort of loose into the waves. And you're like, wait a minute, Bruce Lee, the greatest fighter of all times, didn't engage in a fight with this guy? He's in his power. Bruce Lee is in his power. He doesn't have to prove himself. He doesn't have to even defend himself. He's relaxed, right? He's in his purpose. That to me is the power that we arrive at. It's not the power over people. It's, can I move about the world in that sense of purpose and relaxed presence where I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to extend myself. I can show up and do the things that are naturally meaningful and creative and expressive of my genius and spirit. That's the power I'm interested in. Bring that to leadership, and it's generative. It switches that on in other people to be
Yeah.
authentic, to be creative, and to be in their own power too.
My favorite quote from Bruce is be like water. Be like
Yeah,
water, my friend. It's so brilliant. It's like, yeah, just be like water.
yeah, right. And how much more relaxed can you be than be like water?
That's it. Moves
And
around
that's
all
what he's saying. You're
obstacles.
in your power, you flow. I mean, you talked about being in the zone, being in the
Yeah.
flow. In
Yeah.
our power, we're in flow, right? And so it doesn't require that I diminish or control others. And I can use it to influence,
Yeah.
because influence is fluidity, right? It's literally to make
Well
things
said.
flow in a particular way. When I'm in my flow, I can influence because things are already flowing. I have the ability to cause things to flow in a particular way. That's my influence. And the more I'm in my power, the more I can influence, right? It's all about the flow.
Yeah. I love the concept of flow. And sometimes I'll listen to like some of the Upanishads and they talk about, I am the fragrance and flowers. I am the light and radiance. I exist in all that exists. And if you just take time to really sit in a place and really let that sink in, you realize that your power is everybody else's power. Your power is our power. And it's really brilliant to start listening to some of these other traditions. You had mentioned different cultures and just different texts. And it seems like you can probably find it the same message in Alice in Wonderland that you can in the Tao or something like that. But it's interesting to listen to these things and watch the way they influence you and help you move through the world. Like the message is everywhere. I feel like it's constantly being revealed to you. Like nature is the real school and it's revealing to you the ecosystem under a tree, the ant taking apart the cockroach and moving it around over there. Like there's so much wisdom in nature if we're just willing to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think that you're naming something very beautifully, and I think that the notion that I put forth that life is is an initiatory journey, you're paying attention to these things that are inviting us to the initiation, to
Yes.
the transition from our self-centered, I'm, only I can make things happen, to, you know, I am the scent and the flower, I am the radiance and the light, that there is this interconnected sense of
Yes.
all of life. And that is, as our consciousness grows, as we move through initiations and become less self-centered, less egomyopic, right? We become more conscious. We do literally move into this expanded state of interconnectedness, right? That interconnectedness is not just intellectual. That's what, even in the Western tradition, the theologians will give God three qualities, right? This is sort of, you know, normal trade in the theological world, right?
Right.
That God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, right? God
Right.
is omnipresent, right? It exists everywhere simultaneously. He's omniscient, all knowledge is there, and he's omnipotent. The power exists in all these things. Now, omniscient is wisdom. When you take it to the degree of the divine, right? Omniscient, all knowing, all the knowledge is integrated into oneness. That's a divine definition of God, and that's what I call wisdom, right? Omnipotent, right? The power to affect all, that's the divine feature. In the human experience, it's our personal power. And omnipresent, at once connected to everything else, is literally the expression of love. Love is the sense of oneness and interconnectedness. And so it is wisdom, love, and power as the definition of the divine features. And I believe humans are divine features, right?
Yeah.
So the wisdom, love, and power that is assigned to God, we can cultivate too. But we need to pay attention and be somewhat intentional about it. Turns out it doesn't just happen on its own. I don't know why, it just doesn't.
Yeah. I think that's part of the sacrifice, right? Like it's what you're willing to leave behind. Like that's what I'm learning is that it's not about what you first off, I don't think you can make anything. I think you can only grow things. But I think that the true power comes from being able to leave things behind. Like what are you willing to leave behind? And when you go into an initiatory phase, whether it's some people do it through breath work or sometimes life happens to you, I think a good question that has helped me, and maybe you can help some of the listeners, is what are you willing to leave behind? How much are you willing to leave behind? Because that sets the path for how much you can grow. If you're just going to hold on to these things, there's no room to grow, whether they're ideas, whether they're attributes, whether they're relationships, whether they're ideas. Like, what are you willing to leave behind? But that's hard. But I think that's the sacrifice. Like that, when I look at some of, the biblical text or just other readings that I do, that seems to be something that's coming through for me is the sacrifice is what are you willing to leave behind? What are your thoughts on that?
It reminds me very much of your opening question, right? It was very much your opening question.
Yes.
What is the fee? What is the price, as it were? What's to leave behind? So
Yes.
there's a story of a man who was sent off to by his own spiritual tradition. He arrived sort of through a series of initiations at the readiness to go forth and seek for this particular treasure that these highest initiates could find. And the treasure was known as the pearl of great wisdom. And anybody who possessed the pearl of great wisdom would be able to then tap into this pearl of great wisdom and be at one with all the knowledge of the universe, literally a divine being, if you could possess this pearl. And so he goes off and he sallies forth on this great adventure journey to find the pearl of great wisdom. And he travels through deserts, and he has to sort of lose his skin in the sunburn and his eyesight in the glaring light, and he had to travel through the forests where he was stung by mosquitoes and creatures and sort of bitten by other creepy crawly things, and he had to navigate through frozen tundra where he literally lost a finger to frostbite, and all along sort of drawn by this, the pearl of great wisdom was awaiting him, but there was sacrifice. He had to give things up. Sacrifice comes from the word sacred, to make something sacred, right? And so when you sacrifice, you are required to give something of great irreplaceable value in anticipation to receive something of even greater value. You can't look, if I sacrifice my big pen for this initiation, that ain't shit. I'm not getting
Right.
right? If I sacrifice my sense of identity, my sense of, upstanding, my reputation, if I sacrifice my, my attachment to my job, if I sacrifice, it has to be something of great significant
Yes.
meaning that's irreplaceable.
Yes.
That's what sacrificing. So he journeyed and he traveled and he journeyed, traveled, and he ended up in this little bazaar somewhere in the northern side of the African continent. And he's going through this, bazaar, and all along, all he's ever had is these two bags, right? One bag on his back and one bag in his hand, that he would go through the desert and the forest and the tundra, and he found these amazing little things along the way, little jewels, little stones, little statues, and he put them in these bags, collections of these wonderful, beautiful, valuable sort of objects that he's worked so hard to acquire. And he finally arrives at this place, and he navigates through these dark, dingy little sort of stalls, and he arrives at this place covered entirely by cloth and barely any light coming through. And there's a luminescence coming from the back end of the stall, just a luminescent light all of its own. There's no electricity. Something is glowing, and he's thinking to himself, finally, I have arrived. And so he trembles over towards that little table in the back corner. And as he goes to lift, he's trying to reach for this pearl of great wisdom, but he can't. Because when he goes to move his arms, he is downladen by the stuff in these bags. He has accumulated all these incredibly valuable things that was so hard to come by. And here he is at the very end of his journey, and he can't lift his arms because they're laden down by the stuff he's collected. So he has to let go of all the bags, of all the treasures, of all the things he's accumulated, all the hard-earned stuff that he's burned, lost fingers for, been half eaten alive. And he had to put it all on the ground and let it go, never to be picked up again, to grasp that pearl of great wisdom.
You are a masterful storyteller. That was awesome. That was awesome. I love it. I love it. I could feel it, man.
What are we hanging on to? What's in our bag? What are the treasures that we feel are so valuable, so important, that we are not willing to put them down? And everything that we are holding on to, that is what we need to bring to the altar to sacrifice for this next sort of evolution of our soul and spirit and being. And that's a lot to ask of someone. That's a lot. But you asked, what do we need to sacrifice? It's these things that we hold dearly to. I had to, um, you know, um, I told you I went through a real challenging period there for 4 years. My wife and I, we were now married 26 years. So at the time, it was
Yes.
20 some odd years, right? And so I had to really let go of some of my defense mechanisms that I learned as a child. And quite frankly, the defense mechanism, the particular way that I engaged with my wife in this way, was this felt like a survival mechanism. This wasn't a luxury. This was a survival mechanism. And it was when I was 8. And I had hung on to it for decades, long past its, utility, but it was still there and it was part of my identity. It
Mm,
took real effort to let that go. And the sense of unbelievable vulnerability of not having that defense mechanism on deck was terrifying. It was a huge sacrifice. I lay that on the altar of our marriage,
mm.
right, as a sacrifice so that something greater can come forward. My wife did the same with her stuff, right? She had to put stuff on the altar of our marriage too, to sacrifice some of her defense mechanisms. And we could step on the other side, quite frankly, more intimate, but it was terrifying.
Man, it's beautiful. Thank you. It sometimes I wonder. I used to wonder a lot more, or I came to the conclusion of like, am I fighting with my wife or am I fighting with my mom? You know what I mean? And then that
Yes,
one
you
for me,
are.
yeah, that one for me was like, I'm ridiculous. But it takes so long to get there. It takes so long to get there and realize this is just a projection, man. I'm living a lie. And then you go through the period of like, like the despair a little bit and the disappointment and the depression of like, I just wasted all of that. Then you got to come back to it and be like, okay, well, do you want to move forward or not? The good news is you're aware of it. That means you can move forward from it. That means you can start acting on it. Like it's just the power of awareness, Eric, to me has been something that has really transformed my life and a lot of the people in my relationships, transformed all my relationships, just having the courage to be aware of some things that really bother you inside and then having to hunt those things down and bring them forth into the light. Like, are you going to tell people that? I don't know, man. They're going to think you're crazy, man. Like all of these things. It's so beautiful and so difficult, but I guess that's where the courage comes in, right? There can be no sacrifice without courage.
There can be no sacrifice without courage. That is sort of an unassailable fact. I would press you to consider that in addition to the courage and the awareness, which are like the ground zero for this work, there for this to be sustainable, because you just mentioned something a moment ago that's really perceptive, right? Um, the sort of the depression, the questioning, the uncertainty, the
Yeah.
difficulty, right? And then the possibility of like pushing yourself to keep doing it or berating yourself for not having done it sooner, right? Awareness is first. Without awareness, there's no movement. Courage is second, right? Without courage, you won't take the motion. So you have to be
Right.
aware enough to see what's possible. And then you have to have courage to make the motion, right? Perseverance is the third. You have to keep persevering because, the courage gives you the first step, but there's going to take many steps to get there.
Yeah.
And then to sustain it requires, and this is one of the most difficult parts because from an ego that needs to be affirmed with a need to be special, we don't do a lot of this. We have to learn to bring some grace, kindness, and self-love. Because if we take that away, this initiatory path becomes a path of literally self-harm to your point because we beat
Right.
ourselves up.
Yes.
How come I didn't do it sooner? Why couldn't I do it better? What took me so long? What an idiot am I being? That self-critic, that inner critic, if we don't find a way to soothe that with some inner love, this initiatory path is depressing. So we can go through all the initiations, and rather than come out empowered and soothed and more at ease in our skin, we can also come out being quite bitter and mean to ourselves. I do not recommend that. So the cultivation of
Me
love, the
neither.
cultivation of self-care, the ability to say, I went through it. Why didn't I go before? Because my ancestor could only go so far. That Eric could go that far. He went through the gate of initiation. The next Eric took over, went to this gate of initiation. This Eric is here today going through this gate of initiation. Thank you to all the previous ancestors, the many me's inside of me. I'm not holding them hostage as being bad stewards of our process. I hold them as great guides and courageous
Right.
beings for bringing me to here. And I love them. Them is me, right? I love me. If I can't project love towards myself, this is a very, very, very bitter journey. Even in meditation, right? And I've been meditating for next year will be 40 years of regular meditation. I've put on meditation retreats twice a year. Um, I say to people all the time, this is one of my sort of favorite things to share with people. Why do people start meditating and then stop? And there's lots and lots of reasons for that. Well, it's
Yeah.
unnatural, it's weird, it's hard, da, 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 da. One of the sort of unexamined thing that I've now examined for decades in myself and in hundreds of people, right? We sit to meditate, we have a hard time, and we beat the shit out of ourselves for having the hard time. Come on, man, what an idiot. I can't believe I thought again. How hard is it to just focus on the breath? Where did I go this time? What's wrong with me? And that was for, 15, 20 minutes on a cushion, you beat yourself up. What are the odds that you're going to show up the next day and keep beating yourself up? I mean, who's going to show up to the scene of the beating? What sane person is going to volunteer to be beaten up? And so we've got to cultivate this kindness, this gentleness, this love, or this path is unavailable, just unavailable as a sustainable thing. So
I love it. It's so true. Lighter, what's up, my friend? Lighter is an awesome human being. He's always here. He's always chiming in. I'm so grateful you're here, my friend. He says, I think a lot of the time I miss what life is trying to initiate me into. I can somewhat sense it, but I often grasp on to some lower interpretations. What do you think about that, Eric?
I'm not having a conversation with Lighter, so this is a non-dimensional opportunity. But if you leave
Right,
that up, there's a few
right.
things. There's a few
Okay.
things that come to mind. One, I can somewhat sense it, but I often grasp onto some lower interpretations. It's important not to bring our self-importance into our initiatory experience, right? Who's to say that there's something higher than this going on? So one possibility is it isn't that there's actually some lower interpretation as much as that there's too high an expectation of ourselves, which could be, you know,
Yeah,
our
that's a
need
good
for
one.
achievement could very well bleed into our spiritual efforts, right?
Yeah.
I need to be more spiritual. I need to be more initiated. I need to be more brave. And so I just want to hold that as one option. It's possible the interpretations are too low. It's possible the expectations are too high,
Yes.
and that the self-importance is running the show in the spiritual quest. So that's one. The other thing I would say is that, and I said this earlier, we live in structures that don't give us the support and the ecosystem for our initiations, meaning other people, other elders, other initiates, other practitioners, other devotees. And so in order for us to be able to fully realize it, we go through the initiation. It's difficult to interpret it all on our own. I've been working and studying with teachers since I'm 19. I'm 58 years old. I've had a teacher since I'm 19 years old. I lived with my teacher for 13 years. I studied with another teacher for 21 years. Now have another teacher. So, uh, you know, it's evident to me that I cannot entirely interpret my own experience from the inside. That's where trusted elders are so critical, right? I use the word elders, not that they have to be older in age, but sort of that they've gone through the process and they have a perspective. We need sense-making help.
Yeah.
We need sense. So those are my two takes on that comment.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Thank you, Lighter, for chiming in over there. It brings up the point of unrealistic expectations. Like that seems to be a barrier at times that is insurmountable. You have these ideas, and that's the first time I've heard the idea of I'm using the word unrealistic expectations being tied to self-importance, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this was a realization of mine at a very young age. The ego has no loyalty. It will do whatever it needs to do to keep feeding itself, right? And
Right.
when we enter into our spiritual path, when we enter into initiatory path, whatever it is, that grasping of the ego to be special is got new fuel, right? And
Yeah.
what better way to be special than to be enlightened or the most spiritual or the most initiated or the most wise or the most loving, right? The most, because we will just bring that same intensity and quest and sense of inadequacy to our spiritual practices. And again, practicing spiritual path, initiatory path in isolation as an individual is materially a setup.
Mm.
Finding a trusted teacher, a trusted guide, a trusted therapist, a trusted coach is difficult, right? And it's
Yeah.
vulnerable and it's necessary. We are made by virtue of humans coming together and having an ecstatic experience, right? We are raised in the context of a relationship, and we do not discover ourselves. And self-awareness can only go so far. We need others. We're not entirely self-reliant to produce all this. We weren't made alone. We weren't born alone. We didn't grow up alone, and we won't be enlightened alone. There's a community involved in here. There's other people.
I love that part. I like a part of my journey, and I think a lot of other people have been influenced by the idea of go it alone. And I think on some level, there are parts that only you can go. Maybe it's walking through the threshold. You have to go it alone. But I'm realizing that asking for help is like, there's no way to do it. Like you get to a point where you've gone it alone so far. And for me, the crisis is like, you have to ask for help. And I'm like, no, I got to go it alone, man. I read the book. You got to go it alone. But there's real healing and there's real humility in asking for help. And I think that for me, life is showing me you're going to stay in the dark until you ask for help. Like those are hard things to grapple with, Eric. What are your thoughts on that? At least for me, they are.
So I lived in a community, that spiritual order, there was actually an initiation based order, right? So there were stages of initiation based on the participants' sort of demonstrable expression of their work, right? So I was in one of the I was being initiated into I was going through an initiation, and it's formal and it's very dramatic, right? There's people in like medieval clothing with swords, and there's all these labyrinth that we have to go through and challenges you have to do, and it's like it's like a 6 hour kind of there's things you have to do up to it, and then there's a 6 hour psychodrama process, and then you come out on the other side. There's a feast and celebration and so
That
forth.
sounds amazing.
It was at one point in this initiation, this was my I think the third one or so over the course of several years. I found myself in the center of this large tent on the ground, surrounded by the other initiates, or the kind of the officers that were guiding this process for me. And three of them were standing there with like swords pointed at me, like I'm on the ground, and they're standing over me with actual sharp swords. And they're like, Eric, your initiation and your ability to step on the other side of this threshold depends on your ability to ask for help. Because I'm like, I took autonomy to the nth degree, right? Like I can do this on my own. My literally sort of my traumatic reaction to my family experience was to cultivate a massive amount of autonomy, which worked well with my personality because I can sort of figure most of the shit out on my own anyway,
Right.
And so in particular, I remember this guy, Bruce was his name, and he's looking at me and he's like, you have to ask for help. And I look up at Bruce, and I'm like, I'm probably all of like 26, right? And I'm looking at him, Bruce, give me the dagger. He says, I will cut off my finger and demonstrate my devotion right now. And he goes, Eric, nobody here has any questions that you would cut off your finger and show your devotion, but nobody has any confidence that you will actually ask for help. And I was like, sons of bitches, those guys really nailed me, right? I mean, they knew me well enough to know this was my initiation, right? I had to sacrifice my sort of anxious clinging to my autonomy as a survival mechanism and find ways to engage and fit in and be vulnerable, because asking for help is vulnerable. So this whole notion of going alone, initiations definitionally have a loneliness to it, right? You will go and you will be lonely, and for a while people will be strange and you will be a stranger, right? You'll be a stranger in a strange land when you move through that initiatory portal. Yes, so you have to do some stuff on your own, but no, it's not about being an isolated figure, and it's not just asking for help, it's connecting.
Yeah.
Right? It's being available,
Yeah.
it's being vulnerable, it's being connected. So sure, let's cultivate our capacity to do things on our own. That's agency. That's real, beautiful individual capacity. But don't let the ego sort of turn that into, I must do it all on my own.
Yeah. It's well said. We're coming up on 1:30, Eric, and I forgot if you have till 1:30. I think
yes,
it's time.
it is, my brother. You are an engaging human being and a remarkable species of humanity, and I'm enjoying the hell out of this. But
Me too.
I have other commitments.
I know you do. I know you do. Before we land the plane, where can people find you? What do you have coming up or anything you're excited about?
I am absolutely excited about having the opportunity to keep doing what I do professionally. This is going on 25 years of doing what I'm doing,
Nice.
and I can't believe I'm still as energized by it as I've been. I continue to evolve and be initiated.
Yeah.
So the people who worked with me 20 years ago are not exactly getting the same version as an Eric that they worked with,
Yeah.
you know. Um, my website is sagatica.com, Sagatica, sagatica.com. It's from the Latin word sagacitas, so we get sage or sagacity, wisdom. So sagatica.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm probably most active on LinkedIn in posting ideas and thoughts and things of that nature. I do a lot of sort of slightly longer form. I don't think as long form as you do, but sort of in that neighborhood, right? I don't like the platitudes. Um, and I'm excited to work with anybody who's in a leadership role that is turned on to want to be a more conscious leader and wants to do it either as a one-on-one in a coaching engagement or taking the whole executive team, leadership team through a year-long initiatory journey around the leadership evolution program.
I love it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you found this interesting, reach out. The links will be down in the show notes down there. Eric, I had a brilliant time. It was really helpful to me, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for hanging out with us today. And that's all we got. Hang on briefly afterwards. Everybody else, I hope you have a beautiful day. Aloha.